Thank you. So, dear journalists, experts, Deputy Secretary General, Ambassador, members of Parliament, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, what a discussion it was. And indeed, there have been 2 days of very fruitful discussions, and therefore, thank you for all the substantial thoughts you put into them that have been into these discussions that have been taking place over the last 2 days here in the Latvian House of Wisdom and Light. So we have realized that we are facing 2 wars at this moment. So the one is physical in the territory of Ukraine, which is fought with weapons in hands, where the price is human lives and a nation's freedom is at stake. And the second war across all borders, the battle for our minds, on social media, TV, and news. So the Kremlin's only hope not to lose its unprovoked war against Ukraine is our fatigue. It has invested a lot to influence our mood, to influence the mood of our people, and to intervene in elections, using many different, well-calibrated narratives, be it on energy and food security, inflation, or even using hate speech. Russia tries to reach our societies. So disinformation combined with the rapidly developing AI possibilities can be very dangerous. So we should not overlook this threat. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy is never finished. It has to be protected. Continuously, we have to reassure our commitments. A crucial, if not the most significant role today, to safeguard democracy is played by journalists and their tireless work to represent the facts and the truth. Therefore, I'm honored to stand before you today as we prioritize the promotion of freedom of expression, safety of journalists, and the Councils of Europe digital agenda during the Latvian Presidency of the Committee of Ministers of the Council of Europe. This is Latvia's second presidency since joining the Council of Europe. It coincides with the greatest threat to the entire Europe since the establishment of the Council of Europe: Russia's unprovoked, unjustified, full-scale war of aggression against an independent and sovereign country, Ukraine. Thereby, we are reminded of the broader challenges we face in upholding fundamental values, such as freedom of expression and the need to ensure the safety of journalists, including in crisis, conflicts, and wars. These values are tested, demanding unwavering dedication to protect them at all costs. So already during its 2021 Conference of Ministers responsible for media and information society, the Council of Europe was asked to develop a comprehensive European campaign to safeguard journalists. It is of utmost importance to highlight that just yesterday, in this very room, the Council of Europe's 5-year campaign dedicated to the safety of journalists was launched. And with this campaign, we declare that safety of journalists is a prerequisite for safe and resilient society. It is a must. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout 2 days of discussions, we gained valuable insights into the present challenges facing freedom of expression and safety of those who carry on the work as journalists. As we draw this conference to a close, let us reflect on the powerful theme, "Is the pen mightier than the sword?" I cannot miss the opportunity to quote First Latvian Foreign Minister Zigfrīds Anna Mērovics. On February 1921, In his address to the Latvian Parliament, he said, and I quote, "Latvia has reached two stages in its struggle for independence: the liberation of Latvia and the recognition of Latvia. Both these struggles have been crowned with victory. The first was fought with arms in hand and human sacrifice. The second required nothing more than a pen and a brain," unquote. Indeed, the pen is a mighty arm, even more today than ever. And over the last 2 days, through discussions, we have gained more knowledge of the challenges of freedom of expression and the safety of journalists. To carry conclusions of these discussions into action, the work never stops. This afternoon, here in Riga, in this building, members of the national focal points nominated by the Council of Europe member states will continue the dialogue to work on further implementation of the campaign for the safety of journalists. And I wish all the participants of that meeting a fruitful discussions. So, dear experts, dear journalists, diplomats, fellow parliamentarians, dear participants of the conference, many, many thanks for your participation. Many thanks for everything you do to protect and strengthen our societies and democracy every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Our next intervention is from Agnes Latze. I know you were taking notes diligently while you were observing the deliberations this morning. Agnes Latze is the Parliamentary Secretary of the Ministry of Culture. Your thoughts?
Excellencies, Deputy Secretary General, dear journalists, experts, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to give concluding remarks to this timely, important conference here in Riga on behalf of the Minister of Culture. I spent part of it with you. I tried to collect your thoughts, ideas, and initiatives, and I specifically wrote down the ones directed at policymakers. I'll try to make them known also to the Minister. As she mentioned yesterday, freedom of expression is indispensable for the functioning of our democracy. It shapes societal resilience, it informs civic participation, and contributes to societal cohesion. And if abused, the results are quite the opposite. And this also, as Mrs. Kalniņa-Lukaševica mentioned, must always be protected. Freedom of expression and our democracies must always be protected. In the context of conflict, especially here in Latvia, we've seen also over the last years that hate speech motivated by ethnic hatred has actually been on the rise. And it is as important as ever to have tools to not only monitor it and notice it, but also to react towards it. We have to raise awareness on the implications of polarizing information and such hateful speech, or as Professor mentioned earlier in one of the discussions, toxic speech. Ministry of Culture is currently in the process of developing media policy guidelines, and this process is designed to be inclusive. There are several working groups involving media professionals, representatives of the sector, and actually one of the first working groups was on the safety of journalists and media. And the other working groups also address many of the challenges that you have discussed during this conference. The vital role of media in democratic societies is also recognized by the Minister of Culture, and it is clearly stated in the new declaration of the recently appointed government. A clear commitment to strengthen the capacity of media and to ensure the safety of journalists is mentioned as some of the tasks that the new government has set out to achieve. In conclusion, I want to thank you all for participation, thank the panelists and the moderators, and also thank the organizers of the team behind this very timely conference, especially my colleagues at the Ministry of Culture and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia. Thank you, and I hope that this work is continued in the spirit of the words spoken today in this conference.
I'd like to ask Bjorn Berge, Deputy Secretary General, Council of Europe, for his own final observations.
It's great to be back in beautiful Riga and to take part in this very important event. Deputy Speaker of the Seima and head of the Latvian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly, Parliamentary Secretary of the Ministry of Culture of Latvia, parliamentarians, journalists, dear friends. It is an honor to bring to a close this important and successful conference. Over the course of the past 2 days, you have heard and sometimes shared firsthand, extraordinary, personal, and moving testimony about the dangers facing journalists throughout our continent and beyond. Among these, we think, of course, about the words and bravery of Matthew Caruana Galizia, who spoke so movingly about the murder of his mother, Daphne. More broadly, as you have heard, the risks to the profession today include everything from increased use of intimidation and violence, and even murder, sometimes with impunity, to the modern-day use of cyber attacks, surveillance, and online harassment of journalists, to the grim reality of how these and similar steps to undermine the freedom of media and the role of journalists so frequently takes place. What I can do today is to underline the Council of Europe's firm and unwavering determination to do all that we can to uphold the rights and freedoms of every journalist on our continent. As also stated in the marching orders, so to say, from our European leaders at our recent summit in Reykjavik in May, we will continue our collective efforts for the safety of journalists and other media actors. So the commitment could neither be clearer nor come from a higher level. But we are certainly not starting from scratch. It is now more than 7 decades since the European Convention of Human Rights came into force. And the essential role of the Article 10 in the European Convention of Human Rights for upholding freedom of expression in Europe. We have the fundamental role played by the court in Strasbourg and its case law. A case law that has defined and protected the rights of journalists across our continent, requiring states to create a favorable environment for journalists' participation in public debate and for the expression of opinion and ideas without fear. Building on this, and over the years, we have taken a range of specific initiatives to uphold the rights of journalists, which is so essential for any vibrant democracy. In the recent years, the work of the Platform for the Protection of Journalism and the Safety of Journalists has become even more important, as reports of actions taken against journalists, including wrongful arrests and physical violence, have increased in numbers. What's important is that it exists so to raise awareness and also as a channel of dialogue between media stakeholders and national authorities, with the aim of addressing these issues and seeking accountability. Let me also mention here today the landmark recommendation to all our governments from 2016 on protection of journalism and safety of journalists and other media actors. I believe it gives a very good guidance to member states for putting in place the necessary legal frameworks that protect the integrity of journalists and other media actors. It also calls for the establishment of criminal law provisions that help deter crime against journalists and other media actors, and it enables investigations that prevent impunity. More broadly, it helps create a secure and favorable environment for freedom of expression in a given country, where journalists have the protection that is so essential to their work, such as protection of confidential sources and the gathering and editing of information and news. On top of this, we have also focused on standards on media pluralism and freedom, and placed a strong emphasis on the importance of truly independent public service media as a good source of unbiased information and diverse political opinions. So, dear friends, of course, it is not enough to adopt new standards and principles, despite how important they may be. But we also need to raise awareness and engage in a dialogue with governments, and last but not least, to offer our expertise and assistance. We need to see them implemented. Our specific ongoing activities on the ground and cooperation programs with our member states bear witness to that. These include awareness raising, training of officials and journalists alike, and concrete advice and support for governments that want to improve their laws in this area. One recent example of this work is what we currently are doing in support of Ukraine, and how we have provided the Prosecutor General's Office with support and advice in implementing a communication strategy in times of war. Similarly, we have advised on the government's recent media law and our action plan for Ukraine, which contains a number of projects, which was negotiated and agreed jointly with the Ukrainian authorities, also include measures to support free media. So we are involved in many ways, providing support to the best of our ability to Ukraine. And we will continue to act and adjust our programs in light of the changing and sometimes challenging environment. I also have to mention the work we do to stop the misuse of lawsuits against journalists and media. The parliamentarian Shenak already mentioned his work on this in the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. The strategic lawsuits against public participation, SLAPs, as many of you are very familiar with, is used as means for those in power and those with money to close down the right and proper work of journalists. This is a form of intimidation and manipulation, and is deeply worrying and an affront to democracy that must be addressed. As you know, we are working on a new recommendation on SLAPs with concrete and helpful guidelines for our governments that should be ready for adoption by the end of this year. We will work with our member states and with you to achieve that, just as we are committed to the success of our new campaign for the safety of journalists, launched here in Riga at this conference. The campaign will raise our citizens' knowledge and awareness of the essential role played by journalists in our democratic societies, aimed at building more trust between the profession and the public. And such trust is all the more important in times of war and conflict, when we are bombarded with lies and misinformation. At the same time, in times of war and conflict, there will always be a balance to be struck between freedom of expression on the one hand and the limits on what can be reported for security reasons on the other. But the new campaign on the safety of journalists will build upon key aspects of the recommendation from 2016, as I already mentioned. And hopefully, it can lead to a situation where these standards and guidelines are implemented and practiced more widely than ever. What will also help is to bring together governments, parliamentarians, and other actors in closer dialogue, as well as encourage our member states as a follow-up to develop new national action plans with concrete measures. I believe a good starting point is that we are honest about the fact that there is a gap between solutions that we agree and their implementation on the ground. Just reflect for a moment on the democratic backsliding that is now taking place on our continent, and of which the arrest and intimidation of journalists and attacks on media workers is a key part. All of this further underlines the need for action right now and at the national level, which is a main aim of our new campaign. So at the end, dear friends, you present here today are key to make that happen, as we need national authorities to embrace this challenge, as we need parliamentarians, academics, activists, and journalists themselves, everyone who knows this field and who cares about democracy, to come together and put their shoulders to the wheel so that we work with one another and encourage one another. And there is no lack of tools in our toolbox, I believe, but we must start using them 24/7. So it's a very good thing that the first meeting of the campaign's national focal points will begin immediately after this conference. This shows that progress can be made. And finally, let me congratulate the Latvian authorities for their leadership and for hosting this important event and for the launch of this new campaign. And last but not least, I thank all of you for being here today and your willingness to stand shoulder to shoulder with us in combating democratic backsliding and ensuring freedom of expression and safeguarding the key role of journalists and free media. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So it's my job to close the conference. For those of you who weren't here yesterday or this morning, my name is Jodie Ginsberg, and I'm the president of the Committee to Protect Journalists. At CPJ, our whole raison d'etre, our whole mission is the protection of journalists, the safety of journalists. And so I'm really thrilled to have so many new allies in this mission. Press freedom isn't something that it just exists as a theory. We've heard a lot about Article 10 and Article 19. These aren't things that exist simply on a theoretical level. Press freedom exists in practice, and it's practiced by brave and courageous journalists every day. Journalists like Inga Springer, Olga Rudenko, Daphne Caruana Galizia. It's those journalists for whom we are doing this work. They are the journalists who every day do the work that underpins the democracy and the freedoms that we so hold dear. The key messages from this conference will be distributed online afterwards, along with videos from the conference, so that you can share it and disseminate it more widely. I'm very grateful to everyone for their attention and their involvement and their focus, and I want to reiterate how important it has been for Nicholas and I to hear so many commitments to action beyond conversation. And I have a little piece of paper here. Oh yes, sorry, and a bit of an administrative note, the focal point meeting will take place at Conference Hall A. Which is when you will be taking these conversations, I hope, into decisive action. That's what we need. That's what journalists need. Now, I don't know always if the pen is mightier than the sword. I certainly, as a free speech activist, believe so. But what I do know for a fact is that all too often the stomach takes over from the head when it gets about lunchtime. So with that in mind, we are now going to break for lunch. That's the end of the formal part of the conference, and then the focal point meeting takes place afterwards in Conference Hall A. Thank you all for your attention.